former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The nation braces for impact in the George Floyd murder trial. If we don't get the verdict the left demands, will we bear witness to another round of unspeakable upheaval like last summer? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. We'll recount the early goings-on in the racially supercharged trial of Officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza, and we'll broaden the discussion to how, on the left's signature issues, racial justice, guns, and climate change, Democrats on the left are drowning in an ocean of emotion and virtue. We'll explain. And with Donald Trump gone and Joe Biden now commander-in-chief, our relationship with the world is going through significant changes, and LibertyNation.com's Dave Patterson will join us to discuss how Biden is approaching China, North Korea, and Iran.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. It's the trial of the year, or perhaps it'll turn into the trial of the decade, or even the century, though that's reaching a bit far. But none of us will ever forget the images that turned last summer into a harrowing nightmare. In a nation already adrift at sea in a pandemic came the 8-minute video played on a loop of George Floyd being killed, executed, murdered, whichever term you prefer to use, and the endless weeks of frightening violence in cities across the land, rioting, looting, burning down homes, businesses, entire communities. Months later, following a $27 million payment by the Minneapolis far-left city council to the Floyd family from the city's taxpayers, and the formation of an extraordinary dream team of lawyers to make sure Derek Chauvin, already likely the most hated man in America, cannot possibly be found not guilty. The trial is finally underway and the nation is bracing for impact when the verdict comes down. Of course, the most race-conscious observers on the left have been watching with rapt attention because, as Van Jones said on CNN as the trial began, it's not just Officer Chauvin on trial, it's the whole system.
Look, I mean, everybody I'm talking to are frustrated, re-triggered, re-traumatized, seeing that video, seeing the complete contempt for life. The system is on trial. And I can't tell you, people have tried to push away from this, move on from this. Today brought it all back home for tens of millions of people. And if this is considered legal conduct from a police officer, if you can do this in broad daylight and not go to jail, it will be perceived as open season, telling police officers from coast to coast, you can literally get away with murder in broad daylight.
In order to make absolutely sure that cop who took down Floyd does not run free, the prosecution filed 3 separate charges related to his death. Second-degree unintentional felony murder, third-degree so-called depraved mind murder, and second-degree manslaughter just in case. We'll talk more about the trial later in the show when we're joined by LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza in Talkin' Liberty. But while the nation braces for the worst of what might come from the Floyd trial, we're hoping for the best from Vaccination Nation. More than a quarter of the U.S. population has now been vaccinated, leading most people to believe the end of this pandemic nightmare is in sight. But then comes this alarmist announcement from the new director of the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, Rochelle Walensky.
I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. Right now, I'm scared. The trajectory of the pandemic in the United States looks similar to many other countries in Europe, including Germany, Italy, and France looked like just a few weeks ago. And since that time, those countries have experienced a consistent and worrying spike in cases. For the health of our country, we must work together now to prevent a fourth surge.
A fourth surge happening in some places, largely in the upper Midwest and far West. Right now, cases are falling in 8 states, flat in 15, but rising in 27 states, more than half the nation. President Biden added his own warning and pleading this week.
I'm reiterating my call for every governor, mayor, and local leader to maintain and reinstate the mask mandate. Please, this is not politics. And business should require masks as well. The failure to take this virus seriously, precisely what got us in this mess in the first place, risk more cases and more deaths. Mask up. It's a patriotic duty.
Deaths, whatever. And this leads us to a broader discussion of what are now being called vaccine passports, the new magic bullet proposed by leftists like Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York for allowing people to safely go to crowded places, from restaurants to theaters to sporting events, or be barred from the premises without it. But another governor, this time a Republican, Ron DeSantis of Florida, says it's a terrible idea for freedom-loving people.
It's completely unacceptable for either the government or the private sector to impose upon you the requirement that you show proof of vaccine to just simply be able to participate in normal society. People have certain freedoms and individual liberties to make decisions for themselves. I also wonder, it's like, okay, you're going to do this, and then what, give all this information to some big corporation? You want the fox to guard the hen house? I mean, give me a break.
Now, author and social commentator Naomi Wolf goes a step further, saying the vaccine passport is not only anathema to a free people, but a major step down the path to full government surveillance.
This is literally the end of human liberty in the West if this plan unfolds. Vaccine passport sounds like a fine thing if you don't understand what those platforms can do. It's not about the vaccine. It's not about the virus. It's about your data. And once this rolls out, you don't have a choice about being part of the system. What people have to understand is that any other functionality can be loaded onto that platform with no problem at all. And what that means is it can be merged with your PayPal account, with your digital currency. It geolocates you everywhere you go. Your credit history can be included. All of your medical history can be included. It's the end of civil society. And they're trying to roll it out around the world.
So there you have a worst-case scenario from the vaccine passport, the restriction of freedom. But another popular social commentator, Scott Adams, creator of the cartoon character Dilbert, says limiting freedom is the currency of civilization.
That's true. It definitely discriminates against their freedom. But isn't that true of a driver's license? Isn't that true of getting a loan? People who don't have tax returns can't go on. Isn't it true of travel? You can't travel anywhere unless you have a passport. The entire civilization is built on restricting your freedom. You don't build a civilization to give people freedom. All of civilization is a restriction of freedom. But it's designed to be a wise restriction. It restricts the things that you'd want to restrict. This is just another one of them.
Note how he says neither that a vaccine passport is good or bad, but simply that it is the type of thing we have long chosen to do in the Western world and other civilizations. The concern is that we'll be creating a two-tier society of those vaccinated and those not, haves and have-nots. Finally, we conclude our ongoing series of comments from Godsaad, G-A-D-S-A-A-D, a psychologist and author of the book, The Parasitic Mind. He lists 20 reasons why society is descending into what he calls the abyss of ultimate lunacy. We've covered 1 through 15, and today we conclude with reasons number 16 to 20.
16. It is now sexist to publish scientific research that yields sex differences that are contrary to accepted politically correct orthodoxy. 17. It is now racist to point to FBI murder stats broken down by interracial markers of victim and perpetrator. 18. It is now racist to openly support national borders. 19. It is now racist to seek to curb immigration from countries that espouse values that are deeply hateful and anti-liberty. 20. It is now racist to request that job offers be based on the merits of an individual's dossier rather than on the use of immutable traits. I could go on, but instead read The Parasitic Mind.
You know, I like this guy so much that next week I'm going to cover all 20 reasons God Sod brings forward to demonstrate how society is heading to the abyss of ultimate lunacy. Quick break, and then we're back to examine how our relationship with the world has changed with President Biden instead of Donald Trump as Commander-in-Chief.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
When Donald Trump shocked the world with his election as president in 2016, we knew things would change in our relationship with the world, and they certainly did. But now with Trump gone and a career politician with a more conventional view of foreign policy in the Oval Office, will we return to the days of Barack Obama and the worldview of the globalist establishment? Or did Trump make changes in foreign and defense policy that are likely to last, even through the administration of a president who has vowed to remove every last remnant of the Trump era? Joining us to ponder that question and others on defense and international relations is the former principal deputy under the Secretary of Defense, J. David Patterson of LibertyNation.com. Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be with you, as always.
Indeed, same here. Now, the border crisis, Dave, seems to have demonstrated that Joe Biden will go out of his way to discard everything Trump did, whether it was working or not, to do his best to act as if Trump was never president. Can we expect him to do the same as he's done at the border in other areas of foreign policy and national security?
I think the short answer is yes. You know, people believe that they elected a president and they're dead wrong. Actually, what they elected was a far left committee. And the only thing that distinguishes one member of that committee from another is the means by which they propose to destroy America. And I think we're seeing that. I mean, take a look at what's happening on the border, as you brought up. I mean, this is a disaster, a crisis of, one would say, biblical proportions. And it appears as though this administration is incapable of doing anything substantive to alleviate the problems.
Dave, let's talk about the reaction of the world to the defeat of Donald Trump and the ascent of Joe Biden. How has the world reacted, as best you can describe it?
I think that the nations fall actually into two camps. In the one camp, you have most of the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese Communist Party, Iranians, and North Koreans. They're delighted with Biden. They kind of see him as a feckless, feeble, easily manipulated for each of their own various reasons. Now, then there are the U.S. friends in the Middle East who are, quite frankly, unhappy about this. They see Biden basically in the same way as feckless, feeble, and easily manipulated, but are not capable of continuing what was an enormous step in the region, and that was the Trump-enabled Abraham Accords.
Right, and those 4 Mideast peace treaties that were forged by the Trump administration are barely mentioned. And Joe Biden, I don't know whether he's going to discard those like he has everything else. But let's talk about China for a little bit here. It's hard to believe, Dave, that Americans would elect a longtime pro-China apologist of a president in the wake of the Wuhan virus. But they did. The perception on the right is that the Chinese will eat Biden's lunch, that he's severely compromised because of the Hunter Biden revelations and his repeated defense of the Chinese over the years and not capable of standing up to them. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. When Secretary of State Blinken and National Security Advisor Sullivan met with the Chinese in Alaska recently, the words from the U.S. were very strong and I think accurate. Unfortunately, the Chinese were not there to have a give and take conversation. They were there to set the geopolitical stage, and they, in fact, turned that event into a geopolitical theater. Can you imagine the Chinese telling former President Trump, or Secretary Pompeo for that matter, that the U.S. is not qualified, quote, to speak to China from a position of strength?
Finally, Dave, Trump famously pulled us out of the Iran nuclear deal signed by Barack Obama. It was a deal, not a treaty, not Senate ratified. Where does Biden want to take us in our relationship with Iran?
Well, I think that President Biden would just probably like to take us back to some sort of a negotiating arena with Iran. But his problem is that apparently the Iranians don't have much of an appetite for that until the United States takes off all the sanctions and puts us back into a position of less than ideal. And if the Biden administration follows the Obama playbook, then he's probably willing to agree to most anything and get nothing in return or very little.
All right, Dave, thanks for surveying the world and how things have changed from Trump to Biden. Greatly appreciated.
Great to be with you, Tim, always.
J. David Patterson, LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss how the left is drowning in an ocean of emotion and virtue.
Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Mark Angelides, Sarah Cowgill, Tim Donner, and Scott Cosenza, and this is Liberty Nation.
Now let's take a look at the LibertyNation.com electoral leaderboard. It's still 238 for Joe Biden.
What if stories and legends can offer us the key to unraveling the hottest political issues of the day and apply their lessons to understanding the chaos of modern politics?
Impeach 45!
Only where freedom of speech is honored can people who look, sound, or think differently be truly free.
If you're discussing something that's difficult, the probability that you're not going to offend each other is zero.
President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Donald J. Trump is now president.
With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, it's long been a truism that justice and public policy built on a foundation of emotion become a threat to our very way of life. Altering the law based on the most overheated passions and impulsive demands of the day never ends well. And doing so based on claims of false virtue makes the problem far worse. And yet nearly all the solutions to problems identified by the Democratic Party these days are based on those twin and equally illegitimate rationales. With Minneapolis and the nation bracing for impact in the trial and verdict to come in the killing of George Floyd, the overwrought emotion and hyperinflated self-declared virtue of the progressive left has already been on display for all the world to see. Almost 10 months after the event, and just as jury selection began, the far-left Minneapolis City Council delivered a $27 million payday from the taxpayers to the Floyd family. This could only be for one of two reasons: either an attempt to sway the eventual jury, or gross ignorance of the fact that it would do exactly that. But that's hardly the end of it. Far-left Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, an open supporter of Antifa, stacked the deck further. He went out and hired a Minnesota Dream Team to make absolutely sure Chauvin gets convicted. Never mind if evidence demonstrates something other than a flat-out murder by Officer Chauvin. A not guilty verdict cannot be allowed to happen. So Ellison imports an OJ-style legal team to make absolutely sure, as if Derek Chauvin is not already the most reviled man in America. Then there's the matter of mass shootings and gun-related tragedies. The response on the left, as always, is to stand on the soapbox, indignant at the shame of it all, as if everyone else is not, and vow to do something to make sure it doesn't happen again, as if it somehow won't. Then they demand all manner of new restrictions on the constitutional right to self-protection, as if they're not actually penalizing law-abiding citizens, and more laws will dissuade criminals from plying their trade. When we witness tragedies of the sort recently seen in Atlanta and Boulder, why is it necessary for leftists to cry themselves a river and immediately ascribe the worst possible motive to the perpetrator and every demographic group with which he's even loosely associated? People on the right generally prefer to simply express their sorrow for the victims and their families, apparently unconvinced that people require a lecture on how virtuous they really are. And these leftists preach as if they have anywhere near the moral standing to signal their dubious virtue in the first place. They're apparently ignorant of an approval rating among the governed, often running neck and neck with that of used car salesmen. In doing so, they demonstrate a startling lack of self-awareness that is endemic to these politicians. It's as if they're the only ones who don't realize the shockingly low regard in which they're held by everyday Americans. Of course, this cluelessness is not unique to the left. For example, Senator Mitt Romney himself seems to be the only one who can't see that his emotionally supercharged hatred for Donald Trump is so obviously a result of flat-out emotion and jealousy. He lost for president when he thought he should have won, and Trump won when Romney thought he should have lost. But Senator Romney surrounds his jealous rage with a bonnet of self-declared virtue, thinking he has fooled people, when clearly he has not. When it comes to climate change, the left employs the most emotionally crippling doom-mongering data, the most hysterical predictions from climate alarmists, in an attempt to grind the gears of industry to a virtual halt. We're all dying. The earth will melt or freeze or otherwise come apart in fill-in-the-blank number of years. We must conquer the climate as if we can. We need to place crushing regulations on fossil fuel producers to do our part to reverse the cataclysm, as if the other 195 countries of the world stand ready and willing to follow suit and shut down their own industries because of the wonderful moral example set by the United States. Claims that some people of color have encountered problems with voter registration leads to the emotional demand that casting a ballot become as easy as possible, essentially automatic. Witness H.R. 1, the House-passed bill which further expands the voting rights that resulted in unheard-of turnout in 2020. Matters not whether people demonstrate even a passing interest in their civic duty once every 4 years and show zero initiative to exercise a franchise won with rivers of blood and treasure. Thus, the answer, fueled by the virtue-signaling opposition to the naked racism of Republicans, which is presented by much of the elite media as fact, is essentially to just let everyone vote, no questions asked, as if the result would be anywhere near a true reflection of the will of the people. Conservatives writ large, and of course Trump in particular, have been labeled everything from racist to evil these last years, as if the Democratic Party itself possesses a detectable level of actual virtue themselves, and as if leftists' extreme emotional response to every controversial issue represents sound policy. We can be all but certain of what will happen if Democrats manage to flip their precious few senators opposed to ending the Senate filibuster, the only remaining protection for political minorities. We will see explosively controversial laws akin to the virtue and emotion-fueled prohibition on the sale of alcoholic beverages a century ago. And we all know how that turned out. Quick break, and then we're back with Talkin' Liberty.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. And now, you can keep your kids ahead of the curve with LNGenZ.com. LN Gen Z brings a free-thinking education right into your home for students of every grade level with articles, videos, worksheets, and ready-to-go curriculum. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitled Talkin' Liberty. It is when we reintroduce our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, and the man we have dubbed our guardian of individual liberty, Scott David Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
It's the best title I ever had, Tim.
It is. You would forego all the others for that alone, would you not?
Yes, indeed.
All right. You have been paying rapt attention to the murder trial of Derek Chauvin for the killing of George Floyd. Give us the latest, the things you think our audience needs to know about the trial.
Well, that's how much time do we have until next week to go over all that?
You have 30 seconds.
Just
kidding.
The one thing that just has gone on and on the first week of presentation of evidence before the jury, Tim, is that the various videotapes have been played so often, they're losing their power, I think. What I mean by that is, the first day during opening statements, they played the infamous bystander video that I think everybody's most familiar with. And then they've gone on to play more videos, including the body-worn cameras and also still cameras from around the area and some other bystander accounts. And the thing is, when you just see Mr. Floyd on the ground shortly before he loses consciousness, begging for his life and for his mother and to not be killed, that's much more powerful if you don't see the other videos where he's behaving similarly, but not on the ground with somebody's knee either on his neck or near his neck. That's something that we're going to get into at another time. But so I think that's kind of an interesting facet of it that I don't think anybody else is talking about. But for me, that's what's kind of fascinating about it is you see these other instances where every time they play that video in a different context from a different angle, it can basically diminish the power of the initial one.
Okay, well, we're going to count on you to keep your eyes, as you will, on the murder trial going on in Minneapolis, and the nation girds itself for the eventual verdict. So let's move on to New York, which has now legalized non-prescription marijuana, otherwise known as recreational marijuana, to the civilian on the street, Scott.
Well, that's true. And the civilian on the street, that is what they would know it as, but they would benefit from knowing why there is a difference. And the difference is just this. In places where there is prescription marijuana, there is very often a complicated government structure by which people have to submit themselves to benefit under that system. And basically all the people who are for marijuana legalization say, look, lots of people are going to take it for all kinds of reasons if you just make it free without having to go through that system. But they have done it, Tim. It is a massive, massive win for liberty, for the people of New York. And I hate to sound like somebody in de Blasio's cabinet or something like that, but especially for poor black and brown people in New York City who really were the victims of enforcement of the marijuana laws. If you're, a rich white person who's got lots of private property, private cars, private places to smoke, or consume marijuana and do deals, you know, that's a different life than people who are on public transportation and subject to sort of more invasive police presence because of their use of marijuana. That's going away now.
In a related story, as they say in news, the Virginia governor, Ralph Northam, seeks to accelerate marijuana legalization in the Old Dominion.
Tim, both of these stories, the New York story and the Virginia story, surround these racial justice mindsets that these Democrat office holders have. Both new changes in the law seem to be motivated not by a sense of overall, let's get right with the fact that most people don't want marijuana to be made criminal, but to get on the racial justice bandwagon, because the activist community has been able to sell the notion that blacks are more negatively affected by the laws criminalizing marijuana. These governors have basically been able to turn this into a racial issue. Now, for New York, there's the tax windfall implications, which I think are somewhat less present in Virginia to motivate the change. But Northam has said the only reason why he wants to change the law, and I'll sort of set the table here, Virginia passed a marijuana legalization law earlier this year that was universally kind of regarded as a junk law. It made no one happy. It provided for legalization years later than when it was passed. This move is to accelerate that so that at least personal possession could occur this July. And that's sort of the cycle of which most new laws, when the legislature passes it, come into being. So there won't be the whole infrastructure to sell legally in stores and such, but people may have and possess their own supply and not be criminally liable. But it's this racial justice thing that the governor himself has said motivated him to change law, not to keep any Virginian of any race out of the criminal justice system for something that we now deem as should not be criminal, but just because it was disproportionately affecting minority communities.
Well, that's a perfect segue, racial justice, into a story from New Jersey where a white professor is suing a college for racial discrimination against white people, I suppose.
Well, that's exactly right. The man's name is William T. Lavelle, and he is a professor at Camden County Community College. And full disclosure, Tim, I hold 3 credit hours from that institution.
I think I'm going to give you a pass on
the bias,
the integrity of your analysis.
I earned those credit hours in 1900 and I don't know,
whatever.
91.
1900 is the only part that matters, Scott.
AP credits from high school, but it's a fascinating case. I did call the Mr. Lavelle's attorney to seek comment. I haven't had a call back yet, and I don't know a single case, Tim, where this kind of discrimination is proven to pay out for the plaintiff, which is to say that a person of the majority community, Mr. Lavelle's a white man, has sued an institution that discriminates against whites, in this case, in favor of the 2 black professors. Basically, this guy's a professor. He filed an open records request. He got the salaries of all the professors in the school, and he noticed that these other professors had little difference from him in terms of their experience and training and knowledge in the field, and yet they were paid substantially more. And the only reason he could ascribe to it was race. The big case is Bakke v. California, where the Supreme Court said that especially institutions of higher learning, but just generally institutions, could discriminate in favor of minority candidates. The more that the pressure is to kind of divide up by race and gender, the more you see these valuations where, can you imagine, Tim, if you look at our we always hear these things about STEM, the STEM fields, right?
Right.
Well, if you go into our nation's STEM graduate schools, what you see basically are lots and lots of Asians, fewer number of whites, and even way fewer number of black and brown candidates. And you can imagine, like, if you're a black guy and you've got an advanced engineering degree and you want to be a professor, like, it's like a bidding war, right, to get you, not because of the breadth of knowledge that you can bring to the table, because you can check that box of a minority candidate.
Okay, well, from the campus, we move to the battlefield and the military, allowing transgender troops now to serve openly.
Tim, I think the most fascinating detail about this story is really a market analysis, because transgender effectuating the desires or needs of a person who's transgender to go through the medical processes necessary to effectuate that if they want, right? That's fantastically expensive. Part of this story is that the military is going to pay for this. So let's say you're John Q or Jane, well, I shouldn't even use gendered language. You're Chris Q American, right? And you want to have gender reassignment surgery done. Well, you could either come out of pocket for that. Maybe you're lucky if you get some health care insurance that pays for it, or go ahead and hitch up with the Air Force for a couple year bit, and all of a sudden, John Q taxpayer is going to pay for it.
All right, well, let's end with a difficult one. Scott, this is really tough for you and me because there are few people on the planet who love dogs more than us. And yet we look at the White House, which I first was willing to say is one of the things I prefer from about Joe Biden to Donald Trump is that he actually brought a dog into the White House. But this dog has had, shall we say, the media would
no.
checkered history, Scott.
Don't be Jen Psaki on it. Tell the truth. He's bitten 2 people in the month of March.
Right. Now, on the other hand, I'm just going to say this. I've met dogs that have a tendency to bite people without being terribly nasty. But is the indication that this is really like a rabid type dog at the White House?
Well, Tim, he didn't bite anybody, according to Jen Psaki. He just responded in a way to a stimulus that resulted in somebody needing to be seen out of an abundance of caution by the White House medical staff. And then they were returned to work that day. So that's not a bite. That's something else. It's preposterous. There's no, these are not attacks, as I understand them. They're nips or bites where a dog that's poorly trained and not used to dealing with, these really shocks without biting, right? I mean, you need a kind of more robust socialization if you're going to be around probably dozens and dozens of people and the circumstances of really what it is like to be a dog in the White House. And if you're a big German Shepherd from a rescue with a sketchy history, maybe that's not the best recipe for success there. Dog problems are people problems, right? You look to the owner or the trainer when the dog is behaving problematically.
On that inspiring and uplifting note, thank you, Scott.
My pleasure.
Scott David Cosenza, legal affairs editor at LibertyNation.com. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we will be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.